Today, I'm flying China Eastern Airlines on a red-eye flight departing Hanoi at 2 am and arriving in Shanghai at 6 am. And from the boarding to the disembarking, everything about it was brutally efficient, almost to a fault. So join me on their Airbus A321 economy class to see if China Eastern Airlines are an airline worth flying. We arrived at Hanoi Noi Bai airport at 10 pm, almost 4.5 hours before departure, and it was absolutely rammed. Check-in didn't start for another hour, but people were already queuing, and in fact, I recommend you arrive at this airport at least 3 hours early, as the queue for bag drop became ridiculously long, as you'll see in a moment. Luckily, we were one of the first to arrive, but there was still a lot of standing around waiting. This was the queue for bag drop after we checked in, going all the way back here. Passport control and security were relatively quick and painless, though I did witness something pretty interesting. For a bit of geopolitical context, the sea next to Vietnam is called the South China Sea, or Eastern Sea if you're Vietnamese, and it's hotly disputed, with the Chinese claiming a frankly absurd amount of territory. And they claim this on a map with their infamous 9-dash line. Pretty much every other country in the region rejects this, and Vietnam especially go to the extent of refusing to stamp any Chinese passport which shows a 9-dash line. To get around this, Chinese people need to bring their visa on a separate piece of paper to get that stamped instead. And a group of Chinese people in front of us obviously knew this, but one of them also decided to slip a bribe across with their passport to smooth things over. Now I think in recent years the Vietnamese government has been trying to crack down on these little bribes, so naturally the border control person just looked angry and refused. The Chinese person then tried to hand over more money, thinking it was refused for not being enough, and then after some confusion and struggling with the language barrier, the officer just stamped the passport, returned the money and angrily waved them off. Anyway, I thought this was amusing, and I probably wouldn't have had a clue what was going on if not for my wife, who speaks both Vietnamese and Chinese, translating. Whilst waiting around, I saw this Qatar Airways 787-8, and you can find my review of the business class on that plane in the description below. Also, this was perfect timing, as that's a blurry view of our plane landing. We still had about 2 hours to go before boarding though, so went to the SH Premium Lounge instead. Actually a very decent lounge with some good food, nice seating, and it's free to enter with Priority Pass. We headed to the gate, and here's our plane for today's flight. A 9-year-old Airbus A321-200 with 182 seats in total. And this is where China Eastern started showing their efficiency. Boarding started exactly on time and was relatively quick, with the plane fully boarded in about 15 minutes. And without any delays, we actually ended up pushing back 6 minutes ahead of the scheduled departure time. I can't even remember the last time I was on a plane that actually pushed back early. So here's the route map and stats for today's flight, and it was a pretty smooth flight through the dead of night, arriving 21 minutes early in Shanghai Pudong. Now after landing there was a pretty long taxi, so that somewhat diminished the early arrival, but it was still on time at least. Also here's the seat map for this aircraft, and we were sitting in 37A and B right next to the engine. A random fact you'll notice on Chinese planes, economy always starts at row 30 for some reason. Stepping on board, we're greeted by the stern-looking cabin crew who were standing to attention, then went past 3 rows of a pretty comfortable-looking business class, and into the main economy cabin where the seats look like this. I was in seat 37A, which despite the large number was actually only the 7th row in economy class, and legroom is pretty good at 32-inch seat pitch, basically as much as you can hope for in regular economy. The seats are also very clean and comfortable with good cushioning. There's no IFE system though, and no USB charging port. They have an in-flight magazine as well, which always helps me pass a few minutes of time. It's mostly in Chinese with a few articles in English, but its best feature is this extremely detailed route map. And they also have some China Eastern branded merch. Here I am, trying not to fall asleep. And here we are, pushing back 6 minutes before scheduled departure, at least according to my video timestamps, and it was a quick taxi, so we took off just a few minutes later. Also, here's the safety video, and sorry for the terrible angle, but overall it's quite a good safety video with some nice visuals. Now, my camera wouldn't focus at all during takeoff, and it was too dark to see anything anyway, so we'll mostly skip that and jump right into the flight. The lights stayed off for exactly an hour after takeoff to let people sleep a bit, but then breakfast started 1 hour after takeoff and the lights were turned on and stayed on for the rest of the flight. I just thought, considering departure time, they would give us a bit of time in the dark at least, and I also found it odd they didn't turn the lights back on after the meal service, as it was still dark outside and painfully early in the morning. Anyway, here's the breakfast, just a normal omelette with potato and sausage, then bread, fruit, yogurt and a little cake on the side. It was nothing special. But what I found more impressive was how amazingly efficient the cabin crew were. The flight attendant would literally arrive at your row, shout omelette at you and then sling a tray towards you. Then without pause do the same to everyone else and quickly move to the next row. By far the quickest meal service I've seen on a plane. But when it's 3 in the morning, I guess you have to appreciate them getting it over with quickly. Now check out this beautiful sunrise as we began our descent into Shanghai. It was also exceptionally clear today, at least by Shanghai standards, so we got a great view of one of China's biggest industrial hubs as we came into land. So sit back and enjoy if you want to see that, or skip to 7:46 in the video if you just want to see my final thoughts. As we trundle past the absolutely massive airport that is Shanghai Pudong, it's time to share my final thoughts. First of all, the departure time was terrible for this flight, so I was extremely sleepy the whole time, which might slightly cloud my memories of the flight. But everything was fine, and the seat is comfy enough with great legroom for a short haul plane. Service was a bit frosty from the cabin crew, but overall efficient and they did their job, so no complaints. There's not really any entertainment on their short haul flights, which is a bit lacking compared to competitors in the region, but at least the seat is comfortable and they do give you a full meal service. We were connecting on to London after this flight, so headed to the transfer line, and transfers in China are generally pretty painful, but the flight itself was pretty good. So you can watch that video by clicking the link in the description if you're interested. And now to sum up this flight, China Eastern are just fine, and basically the most average airline you'll find in Asia. The seat is comfy, but basically everything else is nothing to write home about. And yet, their prices can often be so cheap, it's impossible to ignore them. So thanks to all that, China Eastern keep their place as a 6 out of 10 airline on my airline tier list. Not quite as good, in my opinion, as China Southern, but better than Shenzhen Airlines for sure. Now here's a quick preview of the flight I took after this. A 12-hour flight to London in China Eastern's Boeing 777-300ER economy class. Overall, a pretty good experience, but with a few quirks and a pretty poor transfer experience, making them an airline I probably won't fly again unless it's an absolute bargain. In the coming months, I'll also have reviews of Etihad, Scoot, AirAsia, Oman Air and Cathay Pacific, so please like and subscribe if you want to stay up to date with that. Thanks a lot for watching, and goodbye.